Hello, good morning, and a warm welcome to our 8th annual Digital Energy Summit. I'm Mark Stephen. I'm going to be chairing today's event. Beautiful day here in Edinburgh. Sun is shining, birds are singing, you name it, and we've got some fascinating speakers lined up for you today. If you are going to be tweeting at all, if you could use a hashtag Digital Energy Summit. That's all one word, Digital Energy Summit. We've obviously transferred as much of the value as we can from the physical events into this virtual environment. So we've got presentations, discussions, and networking via live chat facilities. We've got a really good selection of solution providers from across the supply chain in the exhibition area. Now, these events are only possible due to their support. So if you can take time during the day to visit them and just have a chat with them and see what they're up to, that will be quite useful. There are a number of competitions and prizes on offer in the exhibition hall with a leaderboard to award interaction and participation. You can click on the leaderboard icon at the top of the page at any time to find out more. Some exhibitors, cunning devils, are giving away prizes at their booths, including £900 worth of Amazon vouchers. That's a total, not a one-off. Coffee vouchers, a Nintendo Switch, a Fitbit, up to 5k towards a cyber risk technical assessment, and possibly most exciting from my point of view, a Lego Technic Land Rover Defender, which is the one I would be after. Take the time to explore the platform too, just have a bit of a play with it, engage with the sponsors, and make the time to chat with your peers throughout the day. We've introduced a new live video chat function, which should allow you to have real-time face-to-face conversations. Click on the chat icon to begin. And there are also 2 themed group chats in the networking lounge that you can join, as well as a general networking chat room. Finally, the conference sessions will be run through a series of webinars. To access the sessions, just navigate to the auditorium page and click the session you wish to attend, or select the hyperlink in the pop-up boxes, which appear immediately before the main sessions. As I said, it's a beautiful day, but I don't need to tell you this is a pretty volatile time for the energy industry. We've got COVID-19, the ongoing energy transition, and low oil prices. It's a complicated time. So the successful companies, arguably, are the ones that are going to be agile and innovative, and the ones that properly utilize digital in whatever form it actually comes. Our first speaker this morning is Stuart Miller, who's Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Technic Energies. And the title of his talk is The Agility to Adapt. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and great to be here, and appreciate Ray inviting us and setting up this this conference and the opportunity to come and talk to you. I always like to start with quite a visual slide, and this one is, believe it or not, some of you may have seen from 1956. This is a 5 megabyte hard drive being transported on an airplane to move data across the country. If we'd talked to the men you see in that picture and told them that we can do that instantly with devices in our pockets now, they probably wouldn't have believed it. But the reality is technology drives change, and it's driving change in a faster and faster cycle. The cadence between step changes is decreasing, and it's important that we manage that and that we stay agile within it and adapt to it quickly, primarily to maintain our competitive advantage, but also in areas like cybersecurity, etc., that we will talk about. So I recently led my organization through a significant merger and then spin-off, and in talking to Ray and others, we thought it might be useful just to chat a little bit about that for 20 minutes. What happened? What did it mean for the team? How did IT support that transition? And then, of course, and amongst it all, the tremendous challenges we've had over the last year around the pandemic. And then how do you continue to innovate and develop in that kind of environment, and what are the learnings associated with it? So to give you all a little bit of context, and not to spend too much time on it, but I became the CIO for Technip FMC in 2017. That was the result of a merger between the French company Technip and the US company FMC Technologies. And that created a combined organization of about 37,500 men and women in around 40 countries globally. So quite a sizable merger. And anyone that's been through any merger activity will know the term synergies. The reason many companies do merge is to drive synergies in terms of cost, but also because of the complementary services, etc., that they offer. So from 2017 to 2019, we were very much in an optimized phase, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, reducing the cost per user, trying to make our cost base as efficient as possible. But then in late 2019, we announced the intention to carve off a part of the business, not a reversal of the merger, but a carve off of a certain part of the business of around 15,000 users, which we started and completed, or were ready to complete, within 6 months. However, in March 2020, right as the pandemic was starting to impact all of us, the company took the decision to postpone that spin-off indefinitely, given the economic outlook and the situation globally, and then finally decided to complete it in January, February of this year, to carve out that part of the business. So obviously one of the big challenges is, how do you do that when most of your workforce are working from home? The traditional ways of working are changing massively, and you know, the agreement I had with the CEO at the time was 90 days warning. We will give you 90 days warning to complete this thing. So I'm going to chat through a little bit about some of the lessons learned there and how we continue to innovate, but I wanted to start with the team and the people. I just want to congratulate and recognize every single member of the IT industry on this call today. I think 2020 was probably the biggest set of challenges you could possibly imagine, and I think the way as an industry that we've responded to that has been admirable, but it's also been incredibly valuable in terms of our relationship with our business, in terms of the value IT creates, and our, you know, it's in our DNA to fix stuff and make stuff work, and I think we showed the very best of ourselves during the last year. However, there was a lot of challenges within that, right? Increased cadence of technology change, the increased pace of digitalization, you know, increased M&A activities, and the speed of technology release. The best example I use of that is, think about Microsoft Office. We used to have, for those of us old enough to remember, Office 97, Office 2000, with gaps of years between them. Now there's updates coming every week. For my team, one of the biggest changes on top of the pandemic was the amount of change going on in the company and the industry. How do you lead people through that change? Two ways I've found of doing that is, we often try to do things perfectly in the IT industry. Perfect is great, but sometimes good is good enough. And setting realistic expectations and targets is really, really quite key. And I know this is a very obvious one, but let people feel involved, let people have a say, and let people help. We have great teams. There's a lot of great ideas in there. But the most important one for me over the last couple of years has been diversity. And I don't mean diversity in terms of gender or race, as important as those are. I'm talking about diversity of thought and diversity of perspective. One of the things within Technip Energies that we've really focused on within the IT group is improving our diversity, both in gender, ethnicity, and many other areas. And what we've found is that the ability of the team to adapt to change, to generate amazing ideas, to overcome some of the biggest challenges we have, has been fantastic. If you employ people with the same mindset, you will get the same ideas. So we have found that by really mixing that up and opening up the idea generation, we started programs like Transform It, which let people very openly communicate their ideas. Really helped with some ideas that really sped up our execution. In terms of IT strategy, strategy is important. I had the privilege of doing an MBA over the last few years and learned a load of information on how to build strategies, etc. But I would challenge all of you, when you build a 2 or 3 year strategy, or when you did 3 years ago, how much of it actually happened? How much of it became true? Strategies are very aspirational and they are important. But I think nowadays, more important than that is the ability to react. And that comes from great communications internally, great foundational technology. Key is obviously governance, risk management, and I keep saying it, data, data, data. The importance of digitalization we all know about, but having the foundational data structured in a manageable way really helps, and we'll learn more about that in just a second. So we did say that we were given 90 days after the postponement of the spin-off to complete the transaction. So obviously during 2020 we're trying to keep the business running. We're trying to optimize our costs because of the economic downturn, but we're also trying to maintain our commitment to the CEO that at any time we'll be ready within 90 days to carve off almost half the business. The challenge for IT in companies today, and I put IT in two buckets. We have the run element, which the users, whether we like it or not, essentially treat like a utility, like electricity. They just want it to work. It should just be always on and always there. The big challenge, though, and this really gained traction with our executives, is the minute you announce an M&A or major event to the market, the bad guys and girls are watching. And so from a cybersecurity perspective, the minute we announced that, as we expected, you start to get the fraudulent emails about, please pay this invoice related to the spin-off. So educating senior leaders to be aware of that was super important. Our external branding was very important, so things like websites, having a seat at the table with your execs. If your company is typically involved in M&A, being involved early so we can do basic things like registering domain names, having branding ready, etc. All of these are super critical. But also we talked about the cost saving element. We talked about synergies. When you merge companies, you're expected to deliver cost savings. When you demerge or spin off, there is something I call negative synergies, which means costs associated with that loss of scale. And I was talking to some peers yesterday about this, that I'm super fortunate in a large company. We have the foundations and the scale to have programs like Microsoft Teams. But I also acknowledge there are some of you on the call from companies that are smaller that may not have those foundational elements, and really have to work hard to make that happen. So one area to watch if we are carving off part of a business is be very honest about the fact that there will be negative synergies. In other words, cost increase associated with some of those activities. As we moved through the spin-off, there's definitely some areas for us to really drive specific value. One of them was application rationalization, and it's what I talked about earlier, the importance of data. Understand your landscape intimately, because when it comes to M&A activities, we have to essentially dispose or build an application disposition. Who gets which apps? Maybe both new companies need both sets of apps. Who's the app owner? And in terms of being able to turn off a bunch, we were able to do that because when we challenged the business, who owns this application? Okay, no one knows. Great, let's turn it off and see if anyone shouts. And if they don't, we'll switch it off and take the cost savings. So that exercise was super helpful. Another area where the business really, I think got value from what we were saying to them was interdependencies. Many of the leaders don't necessarily understand how integrated IT and digital is with many of their business processes. So when you try and separate a company, the implications can be technological, but they can also be process. And that's a very important discussion to have, along with the risk agenda as well. So in amongst all of this, trying to work out how to separate a company in 6 months and then 90 days, we had to think about what does this mean from a pandemic perspective. And I had to have a very honest conversation with our CEO at the start of the pandemic to tell him that we had a material risk around the fact that almost 25 to 30,000 of our PCs were hanging off home internet connections. So without going too technical, I'm sure many of you in the call will understand this way better than me, but the ability to run scripts on these machines, drive SCCM, deploy software, was incredibly risky given the variable element of people's home broadband. We don't control that, so we can't control the quality. So we had to really think, how do we get to these endpoints when they're on the end of very variable connections? We're very lucky in the UK and the US, we have great internet at home, but many of our locations in Africa and Asia still have infrastructure challenges, and that was something that we had to think about. So how did we do it? Obviously, many of our partners were key to this, and you know, things like SCCM. We talk about VPN. My opinion now and going forward is that VPN will just gradually fizzle away. I think we need to be building our environments in such a way that we can be operating anywhere, anytime, and have the ability to manage across the environment. So SCCM in the cloud. Obviously, we use Microsoft Office in the cloud, but many of our management tools, we moved aggressively to cloud solutions to get past that traditional perimeter that we see across the business. As I mentioned earlier, when you announce a merger or a spin-off, the bad guys and girls are watching. So that is the best time, right in the middle of it all, to do penetration testing, to keep an eye on your patching compliance and what have you. And we continue to do that during the spin-off activities. The reality is that we did have to accept that of the 40,000 machines, some of them just wouldn't be reachable. And that meant that there was a higher error rate when we essentially executed some of those scripts and changes because of that. However, having the planning to bring people into the office as needed in a safe manner was key. I underlined here on the slide a really important point, which is tell the truth. When you go into an executive meeting and talk about merger or acquisition or spin-off or material changes, they don't want to hear about problems. They want to hear, how do you get this done? But the reality is that sometimes there are problems associated with the fact that we've managed our costs and made them as efficient as possible. With that comes potentially a loss of flexibility. So for example, if you integrate all your data centers, if you move all of your, rationalize your applications, if you centralize your service desk, this all makes it for a more complicated spin-off if that happens. So trying to get that seat at the table, be a trusted partner, that early warning of some of these activities can be given to you, just makes that whole process much, much smoother. When we think about innovation during the pandemic, and many of you will be working on digital transformation initiatives and what have you, the key thing for IT is make that as easy as possible. Our users don't care from an IT perspective where they're working from. That's just the harsh reality. Whether they're working from home, the office, Starbucks, they want to have enough. They want to have the same experience regardless. So, conversations like, well, you're not in VPN, they just don't care. They just want the service to work. So make it easy, make it secure, and there are some great solutions on the market now around that security element, and make the experience the same. Businesses are innovating in many ways, but they all need to do it quicker. One of the most valuable things we've done is the rollout of Microsoft Teams, video, that we can do, for example, remote inspections. DevOps, the way teams have changed to work remotely has actually worked really, really well, especially in a global environment. But this speed of change and the cadence of these changes is changing the way we have to work in IT and digital. So Agile and DevOps absolutely We need to get there much quicker. I know certainly within Technip Energies, some of our project work is done in that manner, but not everything. We still do some governance and projects in a more traditional waterfall model. That really, I think, is an opportunity for us all to disrupt that and think about quicker, safer ways of doing things. Governance is absolutely vital. And again, I know some of you will be with large organizations, some of you will be with smaller organizations, but as a function head leading IT, my job is to build that relationship with the executives so that I get early warning, so that we're involved early, so that I can then take that back to the team and hopefully make what they need to do less stressful by giving them a longer runway. That's essentially the way I see my job. And so having that relationship has never been more important, especially when it comes to very quick decisions that need to be made about various technology decisions or various contentious decisions within the company. I think the last point here is let your key talent play. And we're traditionally very reluctant about, bring your own device. Microsoft Power Apps lets people, citizen development lets people build apps. And I think we need to be flexible enough to let people do that, because great ideas will come to the surface. The challenge, I think, once those great ideas come to the surface is identifying them, but then critically scaling them across the whole organization. And at the moment, during a pandemic, that is very, very hard. So the way we do it is we do hackathons at a local level. We invite people onto calls and give them a specific problem, let them go build solutions. But obviously, we need to manage our costs, so we can't allow thousands of Power Apps to suddenly flood the environment. So having that governance there that really picks the great ideas and enriches them and waters them and feeds them and lets them grow, and then having the decisiveness that the stuff that, yeah, it's a good idea, but it's not going to change the world, put it away. That agility to make those decisions quickly is super important. So to kind of wrap up where we are, the key learnings, again, I congratulate all of the IT teams, amazing professionals, and as I said earlier, it's in our DNA to fix, deliver, and innovate. But that's something as leaders in organizations we really shouldn't take for granted. So take the time to recognize those efforts. We did a series of videos within our company with the leadership team thanking the IT organization, and that had a huge impact. Let them contribute. Great ideas come from all levels of your organization. And I'll mention again, this diversity is so important. It's really not a checkbox. It really has driven significant value for us over the last 18 to 24 months. Get those executive relationships right. Have that seat at the table. Be in a position that your CFO or head of finance or head of HR can call you and give you early warning. Tell the truth, because even though they might not like the answer, it will build credibility for your function longer term. Explain the risks and boil decisions down to option A and option B. We did that quite successfully in terms of, here's one option, but here's the negatives, here's the other option, here's the negative, which one do you want to go for? And have a great partner relationship with all of our partners. We talk about Microsoft, we talked about cloud first, and I'm a big advocate of that, but on cloud, just be careful, because cloud brings scalability, it brings cost optimization, but it doesn't necessarily bring agility when it comes to spin-offs and mergers and separations. Infrastructure as a service is great, platform as a service is great, but I can tell you we have struggled with some software as a service in the cloud, whether it be collaborative tools or otherwise, to split that off easily. That has been a challenge. And then lastly, simplify and standardize. I know that sounds very, very obvious, but when you need to move quickly, you need to be making decisions based on good data. So challenge your teams to have good application data, have good CMDB data, have good cybersecurity data, and be metrics driven. These things really do make it easier if you are asked to execute large scale change in a very, very tight timeline. So a lot to cover in 20 minutes. I hope you found it useful. I will be available in the Q&A if anyone would like to dive into any specific point in more detail. But Mark, I'll pass back to you for the next speaker. Thank you.
That's grand. Thank you very much for that, Stuart. That's Stuart Miller there from Technip Energies. And as Stuart was saying, if you have any questions that you would like to ask of any of our first three speakers there will be an opportunity to get them put to them when they've all spoken. Just use the facility at the bottom of your screen to put in your questions. There are a few there already. Loud. Andy.
Okay, g'day. I hope you can hear me okay. So good morning, everybody. I am Andy Hardy. Yeah, sorry about the long title. Look, I'm not originally from the oil and gas industry. I used to lead storage for Dell here in Europe, and prior to that, I've been an IT director in another sector. I'll touch on that a little bit later. But for those of you who don't know us already, Nasuni is a multi-cloud storage vendor used by some of the largest businesses and smaller ones as well in the energy sector, as well as in other industries. We work very closely with the leading, what's these days called hyperscale public cloud vendors, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, GCP. And we do that to enable customers to leverage the cloud, in particular for global file storage or unstructured data, as some people call it, and also to enable collaboration with that and to, I think, importantly in this day and age, significantly reduce the costs and risks associated with that type of storage infrastructure. So what I'd like to discuss with you today is first a bit about how we see the particular challenges in your sector. And we've already heard quite a bit from both Darren on the transformation and Stuart on some of the reaction of IT to volatility and M&A, and I'll go a little bit further on some of that stuff as well. So we'll just focus on how we see some of those particular challenges and what that can mean for IT. I'll introduce some concepts around how we can utilize object storage in the cloud. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, and how this can reduce cost and enhance time to energy production for customers, as well as reducing risks and costs. So you don't need me to tell you, as Mark said earlier, the oil and gas and energy sectors have always had to deal with a higher degree of price volatility than most industries. But in recent times, this has been even more extreme, with energy prices moving something like 7x from trough to peak last year, although these have thankfully recovered. But that is the trigger for a lot of change, as we were just hearing from Darren. This industry's always had to deal, obviously, also with political instability, environmental pressures, which are growing as well. But now there's new dynamics in the global economy that we have to deal with on top of this, as we recover from the pandemic at an uneven and unpredictable pace in different regions around the world. I was an IT director in the investment banking sector years ago. And even in that crazy casino, we didn't see the degree of change that you guys have to deal with. So my hat's off to you all. And I do have some understanding and empathy with what you're facing, and some ideas which I hope might be able to help a little bit. So your industry is itself going through a lot of change. We've heard a bit about M&A this morning from Stuart. People are doing acquisitions. People are divesting assets as well. Some companies expand into new regions, while others are perhaps decommissioning, investing in carbon offsets, or expanding portfolios in other ways to transform into new forms of energy production. So what does all of this mean for IT? And in a minute, we'll look at how does that relate to the infrastructures that we've historically had to deal with in the environment. So I think I clicked that button twice. So how can IT ensure that costs are matched to business needs, given all these challenges, volatility and uncertainty? And on top of that, we see an ever-increasing pace of technological change that increases the demands on IT as well. In particular, there's more unstructured file data than ever before. We have to keep data for longer. We need to cater for higher res data formats such as 3D CAD, 4D surveys, and increasingly business demands that our data is readily available anywhere on Earth so that we can respond to demand where it arises and make the most efficient use of our global resources. So IT needs to become more efficient, more productive, and to better match its costs to the changes in business needs. And as we heard from Stuart, those changes can come about very quickly indeed. So I guess everyone in the room, in the virtual room here, will recognise these challenges. So how do we do things differently? In particular, how can cloud technologies be leveraged in new ways? And I'm, in my field, thinking specifically around infrastructure and storage infrastructure to help address these challenges. So I'm going to focus around file storage infrastructure. My belief is that we've reached the point where we can't just keep going as we have before. So why is it like this? Given all that we've spent on IT already, we've made huge investments in the latest and greatest infrastructures, I'm sure. Well, let's look at a typical environment. For example, one of our customers, in this case, it's taken from exploration and upstream side of the business. They had a typical, what we would call a siloed infrastructure that looked like this, with file data historically kept as close to the users as possible because of understandable concerns around performance and latency. But because of this kind of architecture, with each silo of storage infrastructure, which, by the way, the file storage is typically 80 or 90% of all the data that a business would store, each silo having its own instance of file storage infrastructure, its own arrangements for backup and recovery, all of which has finite capacity and runs out of space as the data stored inevitably grows. It's complex, it's expensive, and it's inflexible. And it's difficult to move data around. We often hear people say that data has gravity. It's like it takes energy and time to move it. So it can be difficult to move around due to poor bandwidth in some parts of the world, especially offshore, obviously, and also in some remote locations. And in one case, this customer was even having to put data in flyaway cases to move it to where it could be fully analysed. And that obviously isn't very timely. It's also not very efficient. So this is a kind of madness. I recall from Stuart's presentation earlier, the picture of the 5 megabyte drive getting loaded onto the Pan Am aircraft. That was in the 60s. I don't think we should be still doing that kind of thing now. And yet this is where a lot of people find themselves. So we need a new foundation for our data infrastructure, and I believe that cloud is the key. Nasuni works with the world's largest cloud vendors to harness the huge advantages of cloud storage. Now, I think they're probably obvious to most people at the fundamental level. Lower cost, very, very low cost per gigabyte, greater flexibility, because I can access the cloud in theory from anywhere in the world. I can scale on demand. I can move to an OPEX subscription model. And that lets me better match the costs to changing demands. We've certainly had customers in the last year who needed less of this infrastructure, and so they paid less because they used less. And when I was buying IT for a global investment bank, I would often find that I'd had overinvested in one area, underinvested in another, and I didn't get that money back when I needed to fulfill a requirement in another geographical location. So what we're able to do, and I'll explain a bit more about how we do this in a moment, is combine the power of the cloud with local edge performance. We have intelligent edge cache technology so that we can deliver seamless performance at the edge, because just moving the files to the cloud really wouldn't solve the problem. Without having all of the data at the edge, we typically would have to have it all there in order to address those performance issues. But by combining these two approaches, we can decouple where the capacity is in the lowest cost, most flexible, scale on demand, etc., infrastructure in the world, which is operated by the hyperscalers. We can combine that with the ability to access the data rapidly at the edge. And the impact of the move from on-premises to cloud in this way for file storage infrastructure is typically to at least halve those costs by eliminating unnecessary hardware for backup, for example, and disaster recovery, because we're able to also use this file infrastructure to keep an infinite number of recovery points and to enable that recovery to happen natively in the cloud-based file system, and also to speed up how we move data around the world. So briefly, the way it works is that we're able to implement a global file system in cloud object storage. We charge for this per terabyte per year, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples from your industry in a moment. And we combine that with these virtual edge appliances. They're generally given in virtual form. We give these for free to run in VMware, Hyper-V at the edge, etc., VxRail, and or to run in the cloud. And what we're able to do with these is intelligently cache the active data sets so that users don't experience degradation and performance latency as far as they're concerned. The files still seem local to them, even though we've now made this architectural change to have the data far away. Not just a copy of the data in the cloud, but the primary instances in the cloud, and the access is now local. These edge appliances, by the way, they also include remote access capabilities so that files can be accessed without VPN anywhere and any time. And this is increasingly important given this uncertainty that we all deal with about what do I need where, which resources will be working from home, which resources will be busy in India, and which resources will be busy in South and Central America. And it's very difficult for us sometimes to plan for that. So we need agility and flexibility around that geolocation access as well. We also need flexibility in another dimension. Because this is a multi-cloud approach, in our case, it means that you're never locked in to a given cloud back end. Now, that can be important when you're divesting, for example. It can be important just to drive commercial efficiencies. But you may also find that you're needing to make different decisions about where data is stored and where the most optimal analytics are for a given workload or for a given set of tasks that different business units need to do. So this architecture also means, combined with something we call an analytics connector, that we have the flexibility to leverage analytics from one cloud and storage from another, etc. All of that needs to become fungible to really have flexibility. The word agility is thrown around a lot, but I think it's important to think what we can actually deliver with that. So once your file data is in the cloud, the flexibility that the cloud brings delivers some really key benefits for the oil, gas and energy sectors. Excuse me. With all the files in a single global namespace, any site or business unit can be enabled to access file data from any other location really quickly. Because with this approach, we only need to move what changes. We only need to move the deltas between locations, and that overcomes the sort of heavy lifting of all that file movement from point A to point B. You'll only ever need to worry about running out of storage capacity if the cloud runs out of storage capacity, and that seems unlikely. So you'll never need to worry about running out of storage capacity because your cloud storage can grow instantly and on demand, which is very different to the situation of having to wait for delivery and installation and someone from, I don't know, a system integrator to turn up and integrate that for you and tick the box until the business can do what it's waiting for you to get done. Thirdly, backup and disaster recovery in this approach is inbuilt and at no extra cost. And that means that downtime is hugely reduced. One of the ways that we're able to leverage the cloud storage, the object storage that underlies this, that's what's provided by AWS S3 or Microsoft Blob or Google GCP Archive Object Storage, is that we're able to leverage that to keep an infinite number of recovery points at no extra cost. So that means that I can do a couple of things differently, not only around the cost vector, but also I can now be in a position where I can deliver service levels of just minutes in order to recover files or recover a site if we've lost some hardware at even the most remote sites. And hitherto, it's not been possible to deliver these kind of global SLAs, the same quality of service at an offshore location or a remote desert location that I would deliver in my headquarters in Aberdeen, for example. But now we can, and of course, that means that productivity can be enhanced at all of those locations rather than having to compromise and wait for hardware or whatever it might be. So all of this integrates not only with your physical locations, but with cloud services as well. This enables virtual desktop infrastructure, for example. A lot of our customers, BP is an example, to extend that infrastructure globally by synchronizing the files behind the scene. And as I touched on before, you may also want to have analytics in the cloud. You might be in the process of moving different applications to the cloud. What we want is to make that transition seamless for business users, for business units, so that they see the same global file access, whether they're using an application which happens to be in the cloud or happens to be local or happens to be hosted somewhere else. So I hope you don't mind that word from our sponsor there, and the explanation of what it is that we do. In fact, energy is our most important sector. This includes both operators and service providers in oil and gas, companies as diverse as Ithaca and Swire, Fugro, ASCO, Worley Parsons, AECom, Schlumberger. I'll just explain a little bit more on a couple of quick case studies here, and then I'll be done, and looking forward to the discussions later. So take, for example, Ithaca Energy. A lot of you up in Aberdeen will know that they acquired the assets of Chevron here in the North Sea through M&A. And they were able to rapidly ingest that data as their Nasuni and Azure file storage platform could expand on demand. And I think we do need that ability to, in M&A scenarios, to rapidly ingest the data of your acquisition target. We think that's quite key, not only for to minimise the time it takes to integrate that other business, but also because that's the IP that you're buying very often. But also when you look at this from the other end of the telescope, in Ithaca's case, they've also been able to rapidly retrieve old data, which is, through our approach, automatically archived in the cloud. There's not a concept of a separate archive. Everything is stored in the cheapest storage on earth in the cloud. But I can instantly retrieve any of that data without having to go through a sort of a separate retrieval process from offline media or something of that nature. And by being able to rapidly retrieve that old data, which has been automatically archived in the cloud, this has been invaluable to support asset sales. Malcolm from Ithaca was speaking at one of our conferences yesterday, and I picked up this story, supporting asset sales with historical oil field data far quicker than retrieving from, whether it was your Commvault or some other backup archive solution. And so that we can show that to, perhaps the suitors looking to buy such assets, or to the auditors doing the due diligence on that work. Equally, it's important to have the ability to access that data from anywhere, and that might include third parties and so forth as well. This next example is another customer that's actually the world's largest oilfield services provider. Some of you might guess who that is, but we'll maintain their modesty with this approach. They needed to replace an aging NAS infrastructure, but their problem was that they had network attached storage, file storage, at literally hundreds of locations around the globe. These had been failing regularly, and despite making copies of their data with technologies like Commvault and NetBackup, the usual approaches, into remote cloud locations, the problem for them is that it was taking days, far too long, to recover files manually, leading to downtime and disruption that was unacceptable to the business. I touched on before that data has gravity, it has mass. I'm not actually a physicist, so I'm probably using the terms wrong, but it's simple maths. If you've got this much data and network connections this big, it's going to take a lot of time to recover that back. We were able to solve that such that they can recover in minutes at any of these several hundred locations. And in that sense, they too now have a global SLA, the same level of service at their most remote locations as they enjoy in Aberdeen. And they were able to achieve quite significant cost savings with this approach. I appreciate that some of these numbers might seem to be exaggerated, but I promise you that they're not. They've saved over $15 million of lost resource cost. We did that simply by looking at what had happened in the previous years and extrapolating that out. that global SLA of minutes that I mentioned, and the ability to remove and eliminate lots of on-premise hardware components that were previously like a full-time job to maintain and replace and so forth. And they can now onboard new locations within a short time, because the file data doesn't have to be copied there, which was one of the key steps that was taking them up to 9 months to implement new locations in the past. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into us. Just to wrap things up so that I finish on time, we'd like to suggest 3 things that we'd like you to remember, and we'd love you to come and talk to us about this if it's of interest to you. The largest oil and gas and energy businesses in the world trust Nasuni and the cloud with their files. Nasuni and cloud object storage used together replaces traditional file storage, eliminates the need for additional backup costs and DR and expensive WANs, etc., to move all that around the world, and VPNs for that matter. And this simplified, scalable and lower cost solution can also move file data around faster and keep the business working with less risk in order to reduce time to energy as well. So you can download a white paper. We have here with us today, somewhere in the audience, my colleague Neil McCrindle, who leads our sales for oil and gas globally. And do please visit us in the virtual exhibition hall. Click on the Nasuni booth to access our video and assets and find out more about what we can do. You can also be in with a chance to win a £500 Amazon gift card if you do that by clicking on the competition banner in our booth. So thanks for listening to the word from our sponsor. It's much appreciated, and thank you everybody for listening to me today. Cheers.